So thank you so very much for meeting us and finding No, it was very enthusiastic emails and in return and very encouraging in a way. I would like to just very informally perhaps discuss a couple of questions and ideas as your work and your work as an artist and your theoretical work is very important for us and for the development of the project for the West. And there are probably three areas that we could touch through this informal conversation. That are basically three areas that we looking at with Foreign West project. And first is to look at the year 1989 and look. I'll reflect to discuss how the changes of 1989 influenced the world and thus the so-called West in terms of course, politics, economics, culture, and artistic practices. Second thing would be to look perhaps retrospectively back in those 2 decades and see and look specifically into the dialogue with the post-colonial and post-communist thought. And third area would be to try to speculate about the possibility of a single one world that's on one hand embraces differences but is kind of embedded in this imperative of equality. And of course, very important question, what's the place of art was in this entire story, because we decided to do this research from the field of contemporary art and through artists' perspectives. But perhaps just to start somewhere, you've written a lot about this idea of documentary return, and you claimed that it was one of the most important, one of the most significant development in the early 1990s that kind of administered almost this paradigmatic change from 1980s and relationship between art and market to kind of re-establishing a relationship to the world between art and reality, art and real world. I wonder whether we could start from there and look at the early 1990s, from 1989 to roughly 1995. how these processes actually developed and to which extent it influenced the production in the field of how you see it through your practice and your thinking.
Yeah, I think there are a few very important convergences here because, as you know, 89 was labeled the camcorder revolution, and camcorders played in certain parts a quite important role within these changes and upheavals. And I think that these technological developments, as well as the political changes, really came together to sort of also spawn and encourage this development of, or new redevelopment, let's put it like that, of the documentary art practices. Because on the one hand, there's of course this technological development, development of handheld cameras, which were easy to use, quite cheap and so on to operate. So people could really become producers themselves. But on the other hand, there were of course also these techno-political changes, changes in relating to the world through technological devices, and thus perhaps also a different or altered relation to reality, which was facilitated through all these changes. I think that's one reason why documentary art practices became important again, after being completely disqualified and devalidated in the 80s. I think, one interesting point perhaps is to be aware that in 89 there's not only all these political changes, but it's also the year in which 2 of the most important technological platforms, if you will, are being developed, which is the MPEG format and the JPEG format. So both of which are being developed around 1990. And both of these, or at least the MPEG format, is now one of the most important technological platforms for carrying images. And I think this digitization of images and the mobilization, becoming mobile, increasing mobility of images, also of images produced by amateurs, has really contributed to all of that. I also think maybe, that's a speculation, I don't know, but in the art world after '89, there is, of course, also an increasing desire to relate to all these processes, but also an increasing awareness of, well, actually globalization, of the fact that there is a world outside of, let's say, I don't know, Braunschweig or wherever. Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think there the documentary format comes in as a promise of constituting something like a universal language. And people believe, somewhat erroneously, that the documentary format or the documentary genre, let's put it like this, is something which communicates to people all over the world, which it does, obviously, but it does in different ways. But still, I think in the beginning, for example, Catherine David also showed documentary artworks in the when was it, 97 Documenta. This promise, which sort of traveled on the back of documentary images, was something very strong, and very attractive, to being able to communicate all over the world, and that this could constitute some sort of universal art language also.
And how did it develop then? If you think of this promise early 1990s, what was it now?
You see, this field of documentary art practices is really a field of contestation, because there many people converge with the most diverse, let's say, backgrounds and also formal traditions. Backgrounds in the sense of being located in the most diverse places, but also people who are sort of trained in art production, who have a conceptual art background, which have a filmic background, a journalist background, an activist background, all these sorts of things. So there is no, let's say, agreement over what the documentary format is. And people are still busy understanding each other's different points of views in a way. So if you think about how a conceptual art thought about the document, the documentation, the documentary practice, how somebody who, like me, is rather from an essay film practice, thinks about the document and its, let's say, ambivalent status, then you need at least 10 years of translation for those different people to understand what they are talking about. So I think this process is still going on, and it's very productive. It's also frustrating, it's also productive.
Why, you spoke about the art world being the place where this happened. Why do you think it was the art world where it happened? It could have been the film world, it could have been other places.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know why it was the art world, but I do know why it wasn't the film world. Because the film world, or the world of cinema and TV production, was very much affected by the neoliberal revolution. I mean, especially I think media industries in Western Europe, States is somewhat different, were very much transformed by privatization, the urge to become cost efficient, and so on and so on. So more experimental productions were simply discontinued during the 80s, and thus there were a lot of people, from a film background with no public sphere left in a way to discuss their practice or even screen it. And I have no idea where everybody.
But is it the last resort in a way? Is it the one place where you could find space at that time, or even maybe today? It's a sort of default field.
Yeah, it's the. It's the bottom of the sink somehow. No, I don't know. Why was it the art world? I have no idea.
Because I don't think in the 80s it was obvious that that it should be the art world. I mean, in thinking about filmmakers, I like Shelley Silver or something like that in America, who don't really come into the art world ever, and Brian Springer, those people. that maybe came into the media art world but didn't really enter the art world, and yet now it would be obvious for anybody, I think, of their equivalent interests to find a space in the art world. So clearly the art world shifted or allowed something to grow inside it. And the art world of the 80s was a very closed aesthetic concern with itself. I mean, if you look at the sculptures of the late 80s, and from Klingelhelle to Jan Krause or something, you're talking about a world that's completely self-obsessed and has no interest in the outside. So and I suppose that's the question: is why did the art world become interested after late '89 in the outside world? Do you think, or why is it in the '90s that the art world, on the one hand, becomes much more liberalised and commercial, but on the other hand, seems to become politicised?
Maybe, this is a complete speculation.
Yeah, I understand. I have no answer to it. It's a question, I don't know.
But the mode of production could be an answer to it, but maybe, I have no idea, the art world was undergoing similar cuts and budget reductions, and possibly they reacted to it by emphasizing, process, fragment, research, and so on, simply because it was cheaper, but I have no idea. This could be an answer. On the other hand, I don't know.
But I also wonder whether the neoliberal, in a way the opposite, I think some of that's true, I think, but also that the neoliberal, and I'm speculating now because you're making me think of what you're saying, I haven't really thought about it before, but I wonder whether the neoliberal reforms didn't really reach at least the public sector of the art world in the 90s to some extent. We as a museum, for instance, back as an institution, continue to get public money for doing not very much, in all honesty, according to neoliberal criteria. No, according to neoliberal criteria, it's not. Whereas the media world, for instance, is completely disallowed now from broadcasting. One of your films on Dutch TV would be unimaginable now. I think before in the 70s it would be very imaginable. So clearly they've been disallowed from doing that. Neoliberalism is disallowed that kind of non-populist, non-market-led programming. Whereas the art world isn't, at least in Western Europe, it hasn't been subject to those reforms to the same extent. Obviously it's been subject to them.
So, what I witnessed at that time, and I was not a part of the art world at all in the early 90s, but I got drawn into it, was this incredible desire of people involved with art for the political, also in sometimes very naive ways, but for certain reasons there was certainly this, suddenly this desire.
But you said political. How does this renewed interest in the critical political practices relate to the documentary practices? Is it a easy link to articulate?
Well, at that time there was a strong, let's say, post-conceptual strand of so-called context art, institutional critique. I think this is, for me, very much connected with the early 90s. And obviously, in this context, documentary practices started to play a very important role. Documentary practices in the sense that it were simple documentations, or documents were being shown to talk about certain developments or political practices. So this was, in a way, the first connection between documentary practices and the art world in the 90s, which I noticed. Or large exhibitions, large shows, or shows in which only documents would be shown, archival shows, for example. And in a way, this was an attempt, in my opinion, to reach out to reality by documenting things that were going on, involvements of institutions into gentrification, all that sort of stuff. And from there on, thinking about the document got more and more complicated. And on the other hand, this is one place where this development started to happen. The other one is obviously the growing importance of media and the news, and growing involvement, with this type of reality. secondary reality, if you like, but still a reality. I mean, I think this is also a quite probably important coincidence. I think CNN established itself as a global news channel with the first Gulf War, which, as far as I remember, was 91. So I think you have all these things happening at the same time. Before 91, there was, so to speak, no CNN. I mean, now we are so used to this type of global news. It's really hard to believe. But of course, this created and constituted a secondary reality where, notions like authenticity and objectivity and all this sort of stuff gained an urgency again. I mean, if you remember all these discussions after the first Gulf War over whether the news had reported things accurately at that time, I think it's also being addressed in one of Farocki's installations, cameras on tops of bombs, which are flowing, right into the target, and the image dissolves, stuff like that. So at that point, image technologies were, in that sense, very much interfering into the world and creating new realities. I mean, this is one of the most dramatic examples, the camera as a bomb. And I think that's another reason why documentary practices became important, because it became important to reflect how these news transform our world and how they act on it.
And that's where the field of art gains some importance, right? To question the idea of connection between documentary image and truth.
Yes.
Or is it specifically your practice, or you think it's something that could be generalized?
No, I think, this critique of the image has been a preoccupation of many artists, since the 90s. Absolutely. Think of Farocki's work or Sean Snyder's work. Or there are so many people who question the image as such.
What happened after roughly 1995? Somehow, I remember from some of your writings this year as a milestone in a way when it comes to documentary practices, that this kind of initial enthusiasm about the possibilities of the documentary image, documentary protocols in art making have been heavily put under pressure, become questionable, questioned even? Or what happened then after this initial period of enthusiasm about documentary? Where are we now, for example?
Well, I mean, but this is, it's been going on since the 20s, I think. There is this strong conservative resistance against documentary production in the art field. I mean, in each of the periods when documentary was included into the art field, and that happened whenever there was a sort of political crisis or an urgent situation or strong social movements, at these points documentary art practices would be included into the mainstream art world, let's say Walker Evans in the 30s, all this kind of thing. And then after a while they would be kicked out again, because whenever, let's say, conservatives gain ground again, there would be people saying this is not really art, this is social reportage, art is about the sublime and about, I don't know,
itself.
Yeah, itself. All these sorts of things. I think a similar thing happened also very strongly, for example, after Ocker's documenta. There was a strong backlash. His documenta, or their documenta 11 was being labeled as a CNN documenta. People were making jokes about the length of the films included in there and all that thing. So that was the renewal of the traditional conservative backlash against documentary art practices. And now we are sort of at a threshold, I think. I don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, whether Well, I think in the last years, documentary art practices have been legitimized again to a certain point, but not to the point of completely removing this practice from the field of the art discourse, at least.
But there's somehow a separation from, in a way it's quite interesting. The art got big enough to create two entirely separate and mutually exclusive discourses.
Yeah, absolutely.
That before that wasn't.
You can call it the balkanization, right?
That's mostly with Kosovo. That was a bad joke. But it's maybe a big question. But you said about that these practices allow the reflection of the relation between the image and the real, in a sense. That these documentary practices then coming in on the face of this overwhelming power of the CNN image of the bomb, this seductiveness of it, and its power and its authority. And how do you then construct a moment of reflection about that, rather than being seduced by it? And these documentary practices kind of allow that. But do you see then art, and even your practices, as that reflective possibility? Is reflection one of the key elements that art can bring?
Well, I mean, it hopefully is an element,
yeah.
But and it was certainly the main element in my earlier works. But now I also think that the point of the seduction has a lot of potential in a way. I think there has to be this sort of dialectics going back and forth between the potential of the image, the desire, that people invest into those images, and also the tapping into those forces, that are being condensed in documentary images, and then again, stepping back and reflecting about what's going on. But it's not only about reflecting; it's also about engaging and trying to, not utilize these forces, but go along with them and see what happens.
How about the for example, YouTube reality in relation to what we discussed, documentary image. You wrote this wonderful text in defense of the poor image.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I like the spread of images. I mean, I don't particularly like YouTube at all, but it's a site of conflict, and this is what I appreciate about it. There's a huge conflict about copyright and image production and the ownership of images, which is being expressed on all these platforms. And of course, corporate interests try to gain as much influence as they can in these platforms. They try to manage the desire of the people to be, creative, to be authors, to circulate their own images, or to share images, basically. So this is sort of the basic conflict which is going on these platforms. But generally, I think that the spread of images and the circulation of images as such is great, and it's really great. But it also completely changes people's perception. I really realize that now with YouTube and all these sort of fragmented attention spans, people are no longer willing or even able, in certain cases, to watch like a 2.5-hour movie. It's simply impossible. No. So the attention span is now down to, let's say, 3 minutes, or to the classical YouTube lengths anyway. So the whole, in a way, relationship to film history, but also to duration as such, has been completely reorganized through all these platforms.
What's the effect of that? I mean, as an artist, it makes films that are longer than 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's ambivalent. I mean, there's two possible ways to go about it. Either one is to go along with it, and to try to work with these diminished attention spans, which is in a way a sort of conceptual practice. I see that very often in shows. It's like the one idea work. One idea work, and you have to be immediately able, or at least after 30 seconds, to know what's going on. And these works are not time-based. They are in a way flat because they have no development, no narrative development, so it's just a situation, and if you grasp it, you sort of got the word. And then on the other hand, the opposite pole would be the pole of insisting on duration, insisting on concentrated on places where people can concentrate and where they actually have to watch films which last 2.5 hours. I don't think that's productive either. That's sort of very luxurious position nowadays.
But what you're saying is that it not only has enormous effect on people's attention, but actually it influences artistic practice.
Yes, totally, absolutely.
And already in the beginning, when you referred to the early 90s, when you said with new technologies, everybody could become a producer, I had to think of Boris Gross's statement at the first Congress of Former West, where he said that while in the 1980s we would claim that everybody's a consumer, with 1989, with new technology and other developments in the world, everybody became a producer. And essentially everybody became an artist. So Joseph Beuys's desire, everybody an artist, kind of realized, well, how does this influence the field of art? What does it present before us? What kind of challenges are there stemming from this to the field of artistic practice? How do you go about this?
Hallo. Falsche Dünner.
Ja.
Tut so.
Wollen Sie hier rein, oder?
Kommen Sie einfach schnell durch, wir machen hier einen Gehen Sie einfach rein, da ist die Berlin-Biennale. Hier sind Sie falsch.
How do you get there from outside? Are we doing okay?
Well, I don't know how to engage with it as an artist. I mean, there are so many ways, obviously, but again, the circulation of images and the mass participation of people in it creates a new reality, so in a way people have to deal with it one way or another, I think.
Yeah, well, on one hand you can say everybody an artist, but you can also say nobody an artist, that the field of art kind of loses its own ground, its own expertise over particular territory of production, expertise and knowledge on image. So this can potentially have wide-ranging impact on practices. But you don't feel it's something to worry about necessarily.
Well, I don't think it's going to happen, actually. I mean, just because the fact that everybody produces now and is engaged in, let's say, co-producing the cultural sphere doesn't mean that this will necessarily change the field of art completely. I don't think so. Because the interesting thing is with YouTube is that it mainly administrates invisibility. So, yeah, I mean, how many clips on YouTube are never being seen by anybody? I think probably at least 80% are not being seen by more than 12 people, I think.
Yeah. Never thought of it this way, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's this huge archive of visual dark matter, so to speak, being created, which actually nobody watches. So, in a sense, being a producer is not really the point anymore. Everybody produces. The point is to get attention. So, and there are already new artistic practices which just deal with this point of getting attention. How do you get attention? How do you get noticed in this ocean of images?
But also the editorial or even the curatorial become much more significant in that field, because the archive is so much. It's frighteningly large. As a curator, I think you're constantly aware of the frightening scale of an archive, and that's kind of your responsibility. Curators are traditionally responsible for archives and so on. And much more, a very much sharper one than the production role.
Absolutely, it's probably.
So artists are not only producers. If everyone's a producer, artists
become editors.
Yeah,
or interpreters in a way, and people who make sense of the archive, because the archive as such has no meaning. It's just there.
So I think that's an interesting switching role. So as well as the documentary move, you could say, and this is really thinking about, but as well as the documentary move, as that documentary archive builds up through the 90s, and as a result of all this technology that you pointed at, then the role of how you deal with that archive starts to a role for us, an archival practice in a way starts to emerge, which is not only about preserving and locating the archive in the sense of finding the archive, but it's also then how you use it, which is interesting in relation to that Bosnian film archive. But that's an excellent for later, I think.
I was just thinking something else. Okay. I was just trying to remember something, but it doesn't come to me.
I wonder if we should move on to Former West and discuss what that means. Or
yes, I think we're discussing Former West.
Given the terminology.
Yes. May I pose one question to that? Because it's that relationship between art and politics.
Yes.
And again, I remember in one of your writings that you debated the fact that the relationship between art and politics is usually interpreted through vocabulary of political theory, where art very easily is diminished into an ornament, into a kind of, aesthetic kind of double of something that is much more important. But you had a couple of proposals how to circumvent this situation. How to, and you mainly looked at the idea of filmic montage. In that particular field, but if I remember the text, it was on protest.
Yes, on protest. No, I mean, I'm very surprised at the really neoliberal terminology that many people who are thinking through the relationship of politics and art are using, because art is always, in this type of discourse, supposed to be effective. It's supposed to have an effect on something else, so-called reality, and if it isn't effective, then it isn't valuable, or then it isn't good. But I don't think that this relation can be established. It's so simple, between art and politics or the real world or whatever. And maybe harking back to the point of the reading of the archive, this is where really politics is embedded, also formative. This is the point that Godard was making in this film, where he discusses his own technique of montage. You could, potentially each image can be added on to every other image. There are no limits of combinations. There are just endless possibilities. But why do you choose to combine one image with another? What's the sort of relation between them? And that this relation is what he thinks is political between one image and the other. Why this image? Why not another image? Is it just like an endless addition of new images, or can we also think about other relations between images? Can there be a subtraction between images, a multiplication, a division, an agreement, a disagreement? Images do not always have to add up. What do they do? What is being done between them? What is being done to them? How are they articulated? So this is what I'm saying is actually a very old-fashioned, avant-garde idea of montage, but I still think that it's very important because the lure or the appeal of realism is so strong still, the desire of having representations which could then, act onto the real world or onto reality, and it's not going to be that simple.
Why this is so important for me or for us is, of course, this is the danger we're running within the project for Former West. That we decided to undertake this research from within the field of contemporary art, but we're constantly falling back into some kind of on one hand, language and writings of political theory to help us understand what this notion of Former West might be. It's very difficult for us to decipher it from the work of art itself. And I think we constantly try to be aware of this potential trap of developing certain theory around this kind of strong, powerful, rhetorical notion of Former West. Just not to fall into the trap of ornamenting it or kind of illustrating it with works of arts. How to change the dynamic and really try to be able to decipher that knowledge from the work itself. And that's a gigantic challenge for us. And I think we're not quite managing. And it has to do very much with the fact that what we've been experiencing with Former West, people react to that instantly. Indeed, its rhetorical power is immense. Former West. But when you try to decipher what is it that it precisely mean or might mean, what is Former West, we tend to come up with theories, with writers, with philosophers, with political scientists, and very rarely, if ever, with concrete artworks to be able to articulate what is it that we have in mind. So perhaps your proposal to kind of move into discussing what Former West is a good thing to do, and perhaps because you did follow you followed Congress, you followed to some extent the development of the project, and I wonder, although it's a tough question, I think, but is there a definition you work with when you think of Former West? Is there something? What would be your initial response to this proposal of Former West? How do you imagine Former West?
What do you mean, the political reality or the project?
The political reality.
Okay. Well, I mean, I already told Charles, it would be a good idea. This is what Gandhi replied when he was being asked about the Western civilization. He said it would be a good idea, and Former West, I also think, would be a good idea. I think
we should use this.
Yes, I mean, it's something which is very ambivalent, because in a sense it has happened. The West is no longer the same than it was before '89. On the other hand, it hasn't happened because it still has maintained its hegemony. I mean, largely, not. There are also, of course, other dynamics happening. But so it's both true and completely premature. Yeah, to talk about the Former West. But I mean, this is the problem which probably this title shares with both terms of post-colonialism. And post-colonialism is again different, but with post-colonialism there was these debates for decades, that this is a completely premature term, that it's absolutely impossible to talk about post-colonialism now and so on. So in that sense, probably talking about the Former West is involved in a similar sort of problematics.
We have kind of the colonialism which postdates post-colonialism. So you have sort of Near West, which in a way postdates the Former West as well. I mean, it's sort of there's a sense in which the West is resurgent in a way, which is what Aurora was talking about in the talk, but resurgent in a sort of subconscious way, perhaps, which it wasn't so much before.
Well, but also in a very obvious way, after 9/11 and so on, there was a very strong resurgence of modes of the West, which date probably from the 50s or from the 80s, from these conservative flashback periods. On the other hand, of course, the West is not what it used to be. I mean, that's very obvious. Because also, I mean, if we're talking only about Europe now, it's not as easy anymore to simply use these geographical divisions, you know, to talk about power relations. The strong linear border is still shapes a reality, but is no longer a reality. You know. I think probably the so-called former East is now embedded into the former West, just as the other way around. So there's no longer any sort of clear geographical division.
Yeah. But also, but the former West also implies, I mean, other Wests, historical Wests from the Renaissance onwards, in a sense, and then you come to the global, the question of how globalization has been reflected in art. And I suppose I don't know whether you can answer this question because it's not something you've written about. I think I'm going to ask it anyway. In 1989, there's also the Exposition de la Terre.
Oh, yes.
Which in a sense is this first exhibition that attempts to address globalization. And we were talking the other day about the fact that it doesn't really seem until 2002 and Ocquis Biennale that in a sense any real response is made to Exposition de la Terre. In other words, that this, of course, highly problematic exhibition without question, but nevertheless its attempt, done out of the celebration of the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution, actually not anything to do with 89 in that sense. Is to some extent ignored in the art, or I don't know, this 90s period that you're talking about with documentary practices, how is it, how do you see it, it's happening in global terms rather than a sort of European level? I mean, is there the beginnings of a consciousness that's different in relationship to the planetary reach of art, to the planetary issues which can be discussed within art than before? Does that change, or when does this question of globalization come in?
I think it emerges quite quickly after 1989, but at the fringes of the art world, in activist circles and so on, there the question becomes almost immediately important, you know, because obviously also the consequences of globalization and also of the coming down and the subsequent re-erection of borders becomes very apparent very quickly. But on the other hand, I think in the mainstream art world probably there is a sort of preoccupation with this European scene, with the fetish of the Berlin border and this narrative of the end of history and so on. Or maybe even that is too political to be considered at that point. It only very, very slowly, gradually sifts into the awareness of the art world. But I think, you know, this is really something which comes from the fringes of the art world and which really builds up during the 90s.
Yeah.
This desire and also this need to know more about the world, essentially. Not the rest of the world, but the world, you know. And then somehow it ends up being institutionalized or reaching also the institutions of the art world.
And when do you feel that happens? How does that?
Well, gradually. I think it builds. I mean, you can. Catherine David's documenta already has some seeds. If you look at the reader, for example.
Yeah. But not in the exhibition, really. It's not.
Well, I mean, let's maybe not talk about it. I mean, I have a huge.
But just in terms of the art, the participating artist. I mean, her representations project, Hito Steyerl's documented. You know, so. And it's not a criticism of the show at all. It's just that by 1997, even though there's a consciousness in the reader, I think, and a consciousness in the thinking, it's not yet within the art. And it's in a sense it's premature. In a sense, that she can't find it, or she doesn't look for it, or it's not there. At least in the exhibition, in the artworks themselves.
So I think the desire can be sensed in the setup, but
absolutely, you're right. That's nice. Yes, it's an unfulfilled desire at that point.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when is it? How is it fulfilled for you? I mean,
it's not fulfilled. I mean, it's still completely unfulfilled.
Yeah.
You know, but the desire is gradually decreasing.
Do you think so?
Is it so?
That's
yeah,
interesting.
I think so. I mean, the desire to really engage with the world and also with the political developments, I think it's decreasing, or it's not. I think there are more parts of the art world which are refocusing now on art as such, and painting and traditional art practices or formalism. So
That's sad news.
yes, I think so. But
it's realistic.
yeah, it's. I mean, there is no. I don't know, but I think there's no more clear hegemony, within the art world.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are large factions which start to, become more introspective and narcissist again. But again, there are also large parts which do not. So.
And when did you, what particular either artworks or exhibitions in that period for the last 20 years do you find fulfilling, as an artist? Because you start relatively, we're very young, sort of a conscious, I mean, when is the November is when the original film is done, when in the late 80s? Early 80s. Yeah. So I mean, there's we're sort of going through this period, and obviously looking at shows and writing and things like that. What things really stay in the mind as being influential for you for this project of including the world in the art world, if you like?
Well, actually, Documenta 10 does stick as this attempt, because it was the first time where I wasn't interested in art, at all, because nothing of what I found interesting was ever being reflected there, except in very small shows, in some Kunstvereins or something like that. Until then, and then it suddenly entered the stage, very tentatively and even timidly, but it did. Yes. And from then on, it got more interesting, I think, and also more ambivalent and problematic, because also obviously much more shows failed in a way to deliver. I mean, none of the shows could deliver on that problem because it's still unfulfilled. It would be completely exaggerated to even expect that of a show. But which shows? I don't know.
Yeah, besides.
Yeah, I know. It's really difficult, and maybe you think. But I suppose it's also a kind of spontaneous thing about what artworks or what exhibitions were. It's almost spontaneous, about how what are the ones that you go, yeah, that was significant.
Okay, I will tell you about significant moments. In the mid-90s, there was a show at Munich Kunstverein at that time, run by Helmut Draxler. It was the first time I saw a work by Black audio film collector. So that's a seminal moment, for example.
Yes. Yeah. In the Kunstverein was very important at the time.
Yeah. They had a sort of alternative academy, which was really the first. I think I've never entered any museum or gallery before. I simply wasn't interested, but that was interesting for me. I can't remember. It's rather about specific works, not shows.
Yeah, but that's also. I mean, it's interesting, but just to draw. It's not that we're going to do a survey. It's interesting just to see somebody with your history where you plug in a sense to this art field, and where so individual works also.
For example, Documenta 10, Grimaud Prize.
That was
absolutely. I mean, it was really.
For me, it was exactly this moment of almost revelation. This is possible. Yeah. And more recently?
I mean, I can talk about Żmijewski's Then. I really loved that.
Right.
That was also a good moment to discover that. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to think about it for 10 minutes, really. This is only the first thing that comes to mind.
And I think it is an incredibly difficult question. If you asked us this, we wouldn't be able to answer that.
And actually, many of the works I saw on YouTube, I didn't see them in the show. I adore Phil Collins. They shoot horses.
Don't they?
Yeah, but I've seen it on YouTube. I don't think I've ever seen it installed
Well,
anywhere.
the whole 24
It's
hours.
remarkable. I used to check for artworks on YouTube. It's completely nice.
They're all there.
They're all there.
Honest, yeah.
Oh boy.
And many pieces actually I saw because artists gave me some DVDs. I didn't see them installed anywhere. So.
Yeah, but I think that's also interesting that the distribution
It's changed.
has radically changed. I think, at least for within the art world. You know, I remember being told that say the documentaries before '89, and so we're really talking about the Rudy Fuchs documentary and the Schneckenberg things like that. There were moments where people discovered artworks within the art world that they never knew. So there was really this moment that, okay, this is what's going on, and that people didn't have access to that information before. So the idea of bringing a work from, even from Paris, the castle, meant that the German art field generally got to learn about it. You know, that now is absurd. I mean, you probably, as an institution, and maybe this is wrong, but you wouldn't even tour an exhibition from Paris to Castle, but you think all the people in the Castle would go to Paris if they want to see it. So in the back of your mind, you'd be conscious of this idea of mobility, but also that the images themselves would have been distributed in different ways and would already be part of the art world. So I think that the distribution as well as technology, which is obviously a part of technology, is really significant. So seeing them through DVDs that you're given or on YouTube is perhaps exactly part of the loss of the sort of authority of the big exhibition, you know, which maybe we saw in the last documentary somewhere.
Yeah, on the other hand, there is still something around the big exhibition which is perhaps, it's a bit brutal to say that less looking at works, but creating a public sphere for people to meet in person. So I think that's more the important part of the big show for me at least.
So we should take note of that.
I think that's very interesting what you say. I mean, that's why this idea of creating a big exhibition was on our mind, but not for creating a big exhibition for the sake of big exhibition, but this possibility of assembly, of creating an assembly, you know, people to travel somewhere to gather, almost in solidarity with a certain sort of idea, which we also saw with the Congress. It was remarkable how many people wanted to attend and how many people followed it via internet. We were completely shocked, but this desire for gathering, and I don't know whether that's really public sphere we talk about, or rather something that perhaps could be thought about as a civic sphere. It's it's not really public sphere, but it's a sphere or space where certain kind of interactions can take place. And I think indeed the small exhibitions don't have that potential in a way. Although, you know, I kind of invested 20 years of my life to making smaller exhibitions. But it's kind of desire to create this kind of civic sphere needs a radically bigger gesture almost, like almost ashamed of speaking of volumes. But
I think it's not connected to the number of artworks in the show. You know,
No.
So these are two different registers. I mean, even a small show would have a big civic sphere, I think. But I don't know.
It's about its resonance as well. I think. It's about its resonance. It's about its resonance afterwards. Most shows are not
resonant.
Or most shows that resonate now are not seen as significant at the time, particularly, are not necessarily understood as being, there's not an awareness of their significance at the time, or rarely an awareness of their significance at the time. Well, they might be responded to, and there might be quite a lot of reviews and things like that, but I don't think the significance comes immediately. The art is quite slow in that sense.
Yes, but what's quite interesting for me, like we've been dealing with this notion of former West for now, 1.5, 2 years. And almost every discussion about the exhibition actually focuses on Documenta 10 and Documenta 11. It's very rarely we get beyond these two. And that's something that we probably need to pay attention to. Of course, we can think of important exhibitions where one word resonated, but it's actually, we cannot make a list easily that would go beyond these two key exhibitions.
But the show that I would like to see, I can precisely talk about that. If there were really few interesting case studies which really embody important contradictions, that would be entirely fascinating for me.
Contradictions in themselves?
No, political or social contradictions which act like condensations of a specific historical moment. And then there needs to be almost no overarching paradigm for me, It's just, and probably even the art, let's say, formal character of the artworks wouldn't even be the primary point of interest for me, but the tensions which are being embodied within the works, or within these, doesn't even need to be artworks, could be just objects also.
But then if you talk about these condensed tensions, it's the works you make, for example, Zmijewski then, is that what you think? In terms of condensation?
Why not? Yes. I don't not necessarily. I
was
thinking
to understand what is that condensation.
No, you were mentioning the situation in Angola post 89. I would love to know about that. This is really what I'm seeking.
It is a global history we're rather unaware.
And there are so many points to be added. Situation in Algeria completely deteriorated after 89 because the funding, by the Soviet Union was discontinued at the same moment. Influences from Iran, like Hezbollah and so on, became stronger and stronger. These are the stories of 89, which are absolutely not in the public awareness at all. So what did 89 mean in Afghanistan and in all these kinds of places?
But if we speculate further about how does such exhibition look like, you said it should not have overarching narrative.
Well, I think, it's much more difficult to create a sort of coherent, overarching narrative than to narrate it via fragments, which are complex, and have their own histories, which do not sort of add up to a global narrative. I think it would be so difficult to do it at this point in time, to write the art history of the last 20 years in a sort of overarching, systematic way.
But in a sense, the title also demands that, because the West is an overarching narrative. So the West is an overarching narrative. The West is already, it's a direction which is given to the world, and there's a leadership in the view of a sort of Western modernity. It's a leadership which is given to the rest of the world, and which the rest of the world needs to follow. So if you're going to talk about the former West, you have to talk about the lack of that overarching narrative in a sense. It goes along together. You can't replace the overarching narrative with another narrative, especially one generated in the West, and then talk about the former West. Because the narrative itself is part of the Western. It's the way that in Western thinking, and I remember talking to some Korean philosophers about that, they often see Western thinking as always concerned with typologies. What things are like each other, how do you bring these things together like each other, so then we can talk about this as a mass, so we talk about glasses. And often their attention, at least this is from Korean philosophy, is on this, the differences between this and this, That this is full and this is empty, whatever. And that's much more interesting than the fact that they're both glasses.
Who made it? What sort of glass is it? What can you read from it? What if you shine some light at it? What does it do? Start from the object. I think sometimes it can be much more complex than starting from the paradigm in a way. And I want to tell you one story which for me embodies this, thinking about the former West. And it's not an artwork at all, simply something which happened to me a few weeks ago. I got stuck in Holland somewhere, in Maastricht, train wasn't running and so on, and I had to get to the airport in Brussels, so I was stuck. I got into a cab, and it turned out I had to go to Brussels by cab, And, well, never mind. But it was the best thing that could happen to me, because it turned out the driver was a very young Afghan who had been living in Holland since, I don't know, 95 or something. So what was the story? His father was a minister in the Soviet-backed Afghan government, and of course when the Taliban came in, they had to leave the country. So they left, and they left on foot, and basically he walked from Kabul to Maastricht. He walked, the family, they walked the whole way. They passed every border on the way by foot and illegally, and it took them 5 years to get to Holland. And the stories he told me about these points of passage, and they couldn't take the plane, he told me, I don't know whether that makes sense or not, because his father was a well-known man, so they couldn't take a plane from Pakistan, which had a sort of connection to Afghanistan, to anywhere. So basically they were wealthy, of course, otherwise they wouldn't have made it, and when they got to Holland, they didn't have anything left. And he told me these incredible stories, how they were once apprehended in Austria by police, and this would have meant the end of the journey, and they would have been sent back, and so on and so on. And then the incredible thing happened that the policewoman who arrested them took pity on them, and personally drove them over the border to Germany to help them continue their journey. They were arrested in Hungary, but then it turned out the father had been a diplomat once in Hungary before, so he still had some friends, and they were released and tried to settle there. They stayed there for a year, but then the mafia came because they were Asians, of course. They were harassed so strongly that they decided to pursue their travel, and so on and so on. So for me, in a way, and now he's in Holland, of course, and facing all this wild anti-Muslim resentment, and this is a family which had to flee, from Islamicism, and he was so angry. And for me, this is the former West. This is really the story how the West is the West still, because it still has this very strong resentment against people like him, and how again it is no longer the West, because now it is he, who is the former West, and he's included. He's the story, actually. And there you have this whole condensation of what happened after '89. How whole countries were transformed, by this silly and meaningless, by this overrated Berlin Wall. Let's put it like that, coming down. All the ramifications this had in the whole world, and how, let's say, the consequences, or he as a consequence, is now present within the former West, but not having his story acknowledged at all. This is for me one example of a case study which could really, just by shining light as one individual example, make clear very complex developments. And I think that it should be possible, to have some of these case studies.
How would you do it as an artist? Would you, how to show something like this in a condensed form in an exhibition? Would you document this?
No, I'm not talking. No, this is not, it's not something. It's not a suggestion, basically. But I think.
No, but as an example, I would be quite interested to hear. Like, how does one do it in an exhibition in the realm of art?
I haven't thought about it, but how does one think about collecting the case studies? I do have an answer. This is I would think about the things I want to see, and this is something I would be interested to see. And the same goes for the thing about Angola. Immediately I get interested. And this is for me much more interesting than having the most representative works,
from last 2 decades
last 2 decades. It's very possible, I think, to see them somewhere else as well.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely.
But also you can, in a sense, you can use them as citations almost, and you can bring them into the book. We know that they exist, they're on the YouTube. to some extent, so you can just point people towards that. That you don't necessarily have to have them present. But going back to Maria's question, maybe to slightly rephrase it. As an artist, if you were to be, and this is not an invitation, it's a theoretical thing, sorry, I'm not asking you to decide anything, but as an artist, if you were to get involved in this, what would be an interesting invitation for you? Would it be to be, what would be an interesting invitation for you from Former West?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I'm totally not.
But, I mean, for instance, to produce a new work in relationship to this topic, or to have work that you've already made. I mean, for instance, November or something like that could be very easily understood in this context. I mean, other works in it as well, but November is kind of an obvious piece. And that to have that contextualized in this way, and then to work together with the curatorial team on contextualizing, what would be appealing in that? I mean, for you, not for all artists, just what would you say? Oh, yeah, that's what I would really like to do. Or, we pay for you to go to Angola, or, I mean...
I'm speaking, Charles. I could see that.
I haven't thought about it at all, but I mean, just...
I suppose more in general in terms of your working method, because you could say, well, I don't want to make a work in relation to Former West because that's immediately a set of limitations and parameters that are put on me as an artist, which I'm not interested in. But if an existing work is included, it would be interesting to talk about it, how it is presented, and maybe what other material would make sense in relationship to it, or something like this. Or you would say, it doesn't feel to be too much of a straitjacket. It's something that I can deal with as a response to this. In a sense, rhetorical proposal of Former West that we put out. It's more to get a conception of where you think your limitations would be, or where you find it, either exciting or problematic. I don't know what you can.
Yeah, I mean, just very generally to receive an invitation to respond to the topic of Former West as such would immediately feel paralyzing because I don't know what to do. But to think about it. In terms of investigating something which is important in that context is different. But I'm also wondering about whether it would not be, and it could also be really interesting to team up with, say, David or other people, to have a sort of a collective text about it, about what we think are the main, or what this issue means actually. But I haven't thought about it at all.
It stems of this question we asked ourselves: how to make an exhibition indeed that resonates, that creates a possibility for the civic sphere. And it seems rather obvious that we need to at least attempt to do things differently than is customary in the field of art,
But I think the conference you did has already resonated really broadly because I think of the title, not only, but because it's so catchy and it immediately opens up this paradox.
Exactly.
And I think that insisting on the paradoxical character or the problematic character of the title and trying to further explore this problematics and this paradox and this impossibility of declaring it of seeing it as a challenge will already, it will be engaging for many people, I think, to participate in this discussion. Because
which is fantastic on one hand, but it's also imposing enormous kind of limitation on us, because it builds, from the onset, it built immense expectations in some way, and we feel that the practice in which we try to engage through our work, which is, in a way, to use Charles's term, propose or make modest proposals, seems impossible in this kind of, immense expectations all around the world. So this notion of Former West went into the world without us even working too hard on it because it embodies this paradox. But also it in a way, in a really fast, quick way, articulates desires of huge population, on this planet almost. Like the desire to declare the West former is immense. But it feels that it increases change before us and does not necessarily allow us to work as we used to work, in silence, somewhere doing our own research and only when ready coming to speak and propose something. So it's paradox again in itself.
But I think modesty could be really captured in terms of these case studies. That would also then bring it down to a sort of a scale which is manageable. Because the thing that bothers me about it is the vastness. What you said downstairs as well about this, that we're trying to encompass everything. And this just feels, it's always a bad strategy, and it's always the one that's done by the conservatives to say, look at the Islamic world, look what it's like. This kind of always these generalizations that produce only antagonism.
Yeah, it's also unmanageable, I think, to try to talk about this in its totality, because it's being characterized by not having a totality. So, and you open yourself up to tremendous criticism from everybody who's not included and so on. So this would be the whole discussion about canon again, but going about it in an openly and unabashedly fragmentary way is, I think, this is also, in a way, it doesn't pretend to present ready-made truths, but it's engaged in the process of trying again to find different links between the case stories, and so it's an open-ended story. It would present an open-ended story, and rather like a snapshot of a present state of research.
Yeah, because I think although we're of course, rightly concerned not to suggest a sort of alternative canon, so thinking that we then just start the game of inclusion and exclusion again. It's not interesting, but you do need some kind of trajectories through that 20 years. I think we need that. It's not, in a sense, not building that has been one of the problems, I think, of the if you can still call it the left, or some sort of emancipatory desire in humanity.
You mean formal left?
The formal left, the post-communists. That we haven't built a trajectory since '89, which involves certain either achievements or defeats, but we haven't got events in a sense. The Conservatives got a very clear map of events.
Yeah, but there are the alternative globalization movement. There is, of course, this succession of events, and also I think the first insurrection in Chiapas, all these dates are really, really important because they are really the starting points for what becomes known in Seattle and Geneva later. So also writing a sort of alternative and really world history, fragmentary of this type of events would be very useful.
Yes, there's a sort of activist history.
Yeah. But also alternative activist history, because this also tends very quickly to be very
it's what this is to be the ND archive, I think, trying to do in some ways, the Scottini's, that tries, I think, to map that in some ways.
No, but my first idea was to have all these masterworks, of the post-'89 periods, but in form of their documentation only. Like in ethnographic museums.
That's something what we were debating at some point, indeed.
But to have the first room with black and white photographs.
We were joking by mentioning Damien Hirst, like, what do you do with Damien Hirst, And we were like, even reconstructing and documenting the auction room.
But that's what he did, in the Pop Live show.
He did? Okay, so...
I don't know whether he did it, the curators did.
The curators did. So you see, we relate.
How
do you go about this? Indeed, it's complex. But I think one thing you said, and it's important, that why to reproduce things that we could see somewhere else. We need to think about things that wouldn't be otherwise, and I think that's something that needs to lead our process of thinking. And indeed, this strategy of thinking in fragments is something that's almost freely newly found for me. You know, like that presents another possibility away from the straitjacket of future expectations. And now the canonizing shop, it's really extraordinarily helpful.
But also it's reference.
Each will contain the whole story, you know, but differently.
Yeah.
And that might be interesting. I mean, also I couldn't say now what are these objects.
No, it needs serious work and research and process and engaging.
But it also then makes a clear distinction between the research and the exhibition. And really the exhibition can, in this way that we spoke about, make reference to or cite, to quote the works that are key through a sort of documentation or through a reference to them or through a YouTube link to them, or something, that actually that you allow those to exist as points within the exhibition, but not as immersive installations which seduce you through their presence, but they actually don't get you very much further than that seductive pleasure. Don't really cause you to reflect on it. Then through the documentary, you can construct another kind of reflection.
It's ethnographic display.
Yeah.
Masterpieces.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Get the Madame Tussauds replica of Damien Hirst.
I think that's the idea. So we commission one. Oh wow.
I could have started the Kippenberg just done a series of
in the court.
The heroes of the night.
Madame Tussauds.
But then I think it would be fair not to do it in our exhibition, but negotiate with the museum.
Ethnographic museum.
Or
you
know? Out of 1990s room.
Yeah, in the Colonial Museum.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some space.
I think it's about the time to.
Yeah.
However, Charles, do you have another urgent? Do you have another urgent question?
No.
Should we just end this and thank you?
Okay,
So very much. Really exciting conversation, and I think
You're very helpful.
extremely freedom newly found.
You don't have to tell the whole story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just leave the rest to the viewers.
But also the fragments, because I think where we were before was also in trying to think forward from the research. And I think by saying about the fragments, it allows us also to think back at times. So we can. So some of the fragments can also be historic.
Yes.
So it doesn't mean that you're only thinking forward. But in a fragmentary sense, you can also include the work from. You can also include that history with a kind of fragment. There can be a fragment, that's not thinking about the future, but also thinking about that history.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the thinking about the poor images also, because one poor image may not show anything, but on the other hand, it shows everything. It shows its codec, it shows its form of compression, it usually shows how it's being transferred, processed, circulated, copied, decopied, ripped, and so on and so on. So, just by looking at something which actually has hardly any information at all, you can reconstruct basically the whole history. So, I think that the fragments as such do not even need to be so interesting as long as they reveal something.
Okay. Thank you. We have some chocolate and cookies we didn't eat.